In the halls of British justice, echoes of crime and consequence reverberate through the marble corridors of the Crown Courts. Over the past 3 months, the courts of England and Wales have borne witness to some of the most disturbing cases of human cruelty, acts of violence, exploitation, and betrayal that test not only the boundaries of law, but the limits of human morality itself. This is the story of judgment, of how the machinery of justice responds when innocence is destroyed and humanity turns against itself. It begins in Teesside. A young man, just 17, stands before the Crown Court. His name, Jack Lawson. His crime, the murder of Craig York. On a December night in 2024, what began as a fleeting confrontation became fatal. A knife flashed in the dark, and within moments a life was extinguished. Lawson, a youth carrying the weight of a weapon and a lifetime of impulsive choices, was sentenced to detention during His Majesty's pleasure, a sentence reserved for those who commit the most serious crimes before adulthood. 17 years and 70 days, that is the measure of his punishment. But the true measure lies deeper, in the silent reckoning of youth and consequence. In Guildford, another story unfolds, a tale of speed, vengeance, and recklessness that tore through 2 young lives. Alex Rose, Charles Pardo, and Tara Naggs, their names forever bound to a night of terror when a pickup truck became a weapon. 2 e-bike riders, William Burchard and Darren George, were hunted, chased, and crushed beneath the roar of an engine. The court found intent, a decision to kill, not an accident of fury. For Rose and Pardo, life sentences were the only possible verdict. For Naggs, who helped conceal the crime, 3 years in prison marked her complicity. The judge's words lingered in the air, the vulnerability of the victims, the cold persistence of the chase, and the futile lies that followed. 2 young men gone and 3 others condemned, all for a moment's madness turned mortal. In Wolverhampton, the night was quieter but no less cruel. Paul Topham, 45 years old, entered the home of a 94-year-old man, Harold Monk. It was supposed to be a burglary. Instead, it became murder. The elderly victim, fragile and defenceless, suffered fractures and brain injury at the hands of the intruder. Yet before death claimed him, Monk gave his own testimony, a hospital bed declaration that sealed Topham's fate. Life imprisonment with a minimum term of 32 years. Justice, yes, but hollow comfort for a life snuffed out in the sanctity of home. Further south in Worcester, the motive was hate, pure, sustained, and unrelenting. Matthew Jonathan, aged 39, tortured and murdered 54-year-old Jamie Gawler. The abuse, recorded on his own phone, carried the sting of homophobic cruelty. The court, hearing the evidence, was left with no ambiguity. The act was fueled by prejudice, powered by hate. The judge, in his solemnity, pronounced a life sentence with a 32-year minimum. Yet even that could not undo the final words, the final fear, the agony endured. In Worcester that day, justice stood firm, but humanity seemed frail. In Birmingham, the courtroom spoke of borders and flight, of a man who thought he could outrun the law. Ishmael Farquharson fled to Spain after the killing of 16-year-old Sekou Doucouré during a gang confrontation. But the law followed. Extradited, tried, and convicted of manslaughter, he received 22 years imprisonment. The case, intricate and transnational, showed the new face of justice, where digital trails and international cooperation bring even the most elusive offenders home. And then a different kind of murder, one not of gangs or strangers, but of love turned violent. Amy Pugh, a woman from Stafford, stood accused of strangling her estranged husband, Kyle. The tragedy was domestic, a private horror behind closed doors. She claimed suicide, but the evidence betrayed her. Life imprisonment, minimum term, 14 years. Behind every sentence, a story of intimacy and destruction. A reminder that the gravest crimes are not always born in the streets, but in the hearts of those once trusted most. The courts moved, as they always do, from case to case, from homicide to the crimes against children that strike at the core of collective conscience. At Croydon, a man named Robert Chown was unmasked, a dark web predator who had lived under the alias Mange. Thousands of indecent posts, images and arrangements for abuse lay hidden in encrypted networks until the day the NCA and CPS pulled them into the light. 41 crimes, 18 years in prison, 7 more on extended licence. a global web of harm dismantled, but its echoes remain in the unseen corners of the internet, where exploitation festers in silence. Meanwhile, at the Organised Child Sexual Abuse Unit, another case reached its breaking point. Edward Gratwick, 68 years old, convicted of arranging to rape children, including the youngest of the young. The details unbearable: encrypted messages, talk of sedatives, travel plans for assault. He awaits his sentence, but his guilt is already sealed in the digital evidence he left behind. The case stands as a monument to depravity and to the enduring resolve of prosecutors to bring such men to account. In Bradford, justice looked backward, 2 decades into the past. 8 men were sentenced for historic child sexual exploitation. Their victim, a child once silenced by fear, finally heard through the voice of the court. It was not merely punishment, but recognition, an acknowledgement that even old wounds deserve healing through truth. A similar reckoning took place in Rochdale. 7 men stood before the court, found guilty of systematically raping and abusing 2 vulnerable girls. The judge's remarks spoke of trust betrayed, of the corrosive power of manipulation, and of the community's long wait for justice. Years may have passed, but in the eyes of the law, no time erases guilt. Then the case that shook Mould Crown Court to its foundations. The King Fifth of Michael Ives, Kerry Ives and Shannon Ives. A child, 2 years old, his name Ethan Ives Griffiths. His fate, sealed by those who should have protected him. The cruelty was prolonged, the suffering immense. The grandparents, Michael and Kerry, were sentenced to life imprisonment, minimum terms of 23 and 17 years. Shannon Ives, Ethan's mother, was convicted of permitting his murder. The judge described deception and delay, lies to medics, silence in the face of agony. The courtroom fell still as the facts emerged. This was not a momentary lapse, but a pattern of brutality culminating in death. Ethan's name now stands as both tragedy and testimony, a warning that justice, though slow, never forgets. Through these cases, one thread weaves all together: the principle that no crime is beyond the reach of accountability. From the dark alleys of violence to the hidden recesses of the internet, the courts have spoken with precision and gravity. Each judgment reflects not only law, but humanity, balancing youth and remorse, aggravation and mitigation, cruelty and circumstance. The sentencing judges leaned on the framework of the Sentencing Act 2020, Schedule 21, which sets the foundations for murder cases. They weighed intent, weapons brought to the scene, the vulnerability of victims, and the age and understanding of offenders. Where a weapon was carried, as in Lawson's case, the starting point rose. Where victims were children or dependent, as in Ives or Pugh, trust amplified culpability. Where hatred or prejudice stained the act, as in Jonathan's, the law marked it as a crime not only of violence but of ideology. Extended sentences, particularly in sexual offences, signalled a growing judicial concern for public protection. In Chown's case, the court's voice was clear. The danger did not end with imprisonment. It would follow him long after release. In historic cases like Bradford and Rochdale, the courts acknowledged the pain that lingers when society fails to act in time. And as these judgments accumulated, they told a larger story, one about the role of justice itself. The judiciary, impartial yet deeply human, stands as the barrier between chaos and order. Their task, to read cruelty without succumbing to despair, to punish without vengeance, to uphold the law with eyes open to suffering. In their sentencing remarks, judges often paused, not for effect, but for humanity. They spoke of victims who could not speak for themselves. They acknowledged communities shaken, police and prosecutors who worked tirelessly, and families forever marked by the crimes committed. Each life lost, each sentence delivered, became a piece of the moral architecture of a nation striving to reconcile its freedoms with its failings. Yet beyond the courtrooms lies another question. What becomes of us as a society when the darkest crimes become routine headlines? The Ministry of Justice speaks of transparency, of achieving the best evidence. But behind every PDF of sentencing remarks lies a human story: fear, loss, remorse, or sometimes none at all. As the credits of judgment continue to scroll through time, the system endures, imperfect but unwavering. For every crime there is a consequence, for every silence, a verdict. For every child, a right to safety. For every act of hate, a counterbalance of law. In the end, justice is not merely about the guilty or the innocent. It is about remembering those who suffered and those who stood to speak for them. Across Teesside, Guildford, Wolverhampton, Worcester, Birmingham, Stafford, Croydon, Bradford, Rochdale, and Mould, the same voice resounds. Justice must be seen, must be done, and must endure. And so, the gavel falls again, in solemn rhythm to the heartbeat of a nation confronting its own conscience.